Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Hey, Carol, don't know if you saw this yesterday, but Stanley Black & Decker, they made Craftsman and DeWalt. They warned of raising prices.
I have a few. I've used a few.
Well, they warned that those prices could go up in response to higher tariffs that it expects to be imposed by President-elect Donald Trump's administration. I put this out on the X platform yesterday, and some people responded, hey, just make this stuff in the U.S. That's the whole idea of these tariffs. But if you go further down into the article by our Bloomberg News team, they wrote that the company's CEO said it's unlikely we're moving a lot back to the U.S. because it's just not cost effective to do so. There's questions about whether we even have the labor to actually do that in this country.
Especially too, some would say that we're going to push back on immigrants and immigration, and that is going to really squeeze the workforce even more. So there's a lot to think about here, Tim.
Yeah, no question. A lot of executives are thinking about what their supply chains are going to look like, given what Trump has said about tariffs on the campaign trail and what he did in the first administration. For more on that, we go to Nazak Nikakhtar, partner and chair of the national security law practice at the law firm Wiley Rein, where she specializes in international trade and national security. Also an economist and former assistant secretary and undersecretary at the Department of Commerce under President Trump from 2018 to 2021. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Nazak, good to have you with us. I want to talk trade because you've been in close touch with Trump's transition team, Robert Lighthizer, who was U.S. trade representative in the first Trump administration. We're going to talk about trade and tariffs in just a second, but we're getting so much news about potential appointees and actual people who have been tapped that I just want you to weigh in on what it looks like to have Attorney General Matt Gaetz, for example, be tapped by the former president, the president-elect, to serve as Attorney General. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't want to sort of speculate in terms of, and it's very, very good to be with you. I don't want to speculate in terms of what the political appointments mean generally for very specific policies. But the trend that's really important to see is that the political appointments are aligning with President Trump's campaign promises, right? Much more forward-leaning policies to deal with the threats that we're seeing in terms of the economic and national security threats. So I am personally pleased to see, delivering on those promises to take on some of these big issues that you're talking about.
It does seem like the one thread that sort of ties all these names together is loyalty to the former president and the president-elect. And I'm wondering what you make of that. Much has been made of the whole idea of having a, quote, team of rivals like we've seen in past administrations. What do you make of what the president-elect is doing now, tapping people who've defended him vigorously on TV over the last 4 years?
And it's an excellent question because it really underscores a very key point. A really effective administration is going to have cabinet members who are like-minded and are rowing in the same direction. We've seen too many times cabinet members who are constantly in disagreement, and that impedes progress. China is a big elephant in the room. China is the national security threat of our time. It is the big rival. And time is running out. We see what China's doing in the Indo-Pacific. We really need an administration who has like-minded cabinet members who are going to work and advance policies in unison.
But tell us about, since you've been on the inside and you understand kind of how things work, many would argue it's great to have a leader, but it's also good to have, key advisors around him that don't all just say yes, but they also challenge. So are we not going, I'm assuming you had some of that there when you were there. Are we not going to have that this time around?
Absolutely. We're obviously going to see that. I think the important thing is that we have cabinet members who are all in agreement of what the threat is. But every single individual is going to have a different opinion and how to counter the threats. And so it's really important to have different opinions, and that makes for better policies. But we just don't want to be in a situation where the cabinet members are not like-minded in terms of the threat that we really have to counter, which is China.
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit, because the company ByteDance, it's the parent company of TikTok. And in the first Trump administration, he signed an executive order that would have banned TikTok. The Washington Post, though, reporting this week that the president-elect may halt a potential ban. It's a campaign promise that he had. He wanted to save the app. He even had a presence on it. In your view, should TikTok be banned?
I think there's enough information out there that TikTok, through its surveillance capabilities, et cetera, is posing a significant national security threat. In fact, Europe, countries in Europe have made findings about how TikTok is misusing children's information. That said, it's really important to underscore also that there are so many Chinese companies that are in our infrastructure, telecommunications companies with the surveillance software, hardware, et cetera, that focusing just on one company is moving our eye away from what really we need to focus on, which is the big threats to U.S. infrastructure.
That is a company, though, that has the attention of millions of young people here in the U.S., and it has the ability to influence the way that they view certain things. So I think that is a unique company to be talking about. We can talk about some of the other ones. So are you saying that it shouldn't be banned because there's too many companies that have a presence in our lives in terms of companies that are from China?
Look, I think the best way to assess this is, Director Wray did a great job in terms of going back to Congress over and over again in terms of providing assessments on the national security threat. And I actually think Congress ended up exactly where they need to be in terms of, the proposed ban on TikTok. Once the president and his cabinet members are certainly in the office, I think that they're going to look at classified information and make the right decision. But based on the information that exists today, I believe that there are national security threats that TikTok ByteDance pose, and I do think that Congress, based on the information from the U.S. intelligence community, landed on the right outcome.
I think a lot about global supply chains. Tim kicked it off talking about the Stanley Black & Decker CEO about the inability not to be able to make his products here in the United States. Won't maybe have the labor. It's not going to be cost effective. How concerned are you, about these pending tariffs from a Trump administration and the implications it will have on American companies?
Look, the reality is that we're not going to be able to make everything we need to in the United States. But I think the U.S. government is correct in focusing on the things that are critical to the defense industrial base and the broader industrial base that spill over into the defense industrial base. Those things we really need to have, whether in the United States or in close proximity to the United States, in case there's an emergency. And we need access to those supply chains. At the same time, I often hear the fact that, tariffs are going to make things more expensive, right? Sometimes they do. Sometimes, in fact, China tends to absorb a lot of the tariffs that are placed on it because it just doesn't want to displace itself from the U.S. market. I think both things are true, just depending on the item, the good and the tariffs that are imposed. But at the end of the day, tariffs are intended, the laws that permit the imposition of tariffs are intended to provide price corrections. So it's not just is something more expensive than it was yesterday, is sometimes it becoming more expensive is fixing the price distortion. And that then translates to companies making more money, higher wages, et cetera, when they're actually able to compete, get back into the marketplace and not be displaced from Chinese goods that are 40% of the price that they're offering, right? And it's not just because China is more competitive. This is the function of Chinese industrial subsidies and a range of Chinese policies that underprice.
Nazak, so then are you saying, because initially, the president-elect has vowed 20% on all foreign goods and 60% or higher on goods coming from China. Are you saying in the end, and only get about 30 seconds, that he will be much more selective in terms of what tariffs are being placed? Just quickly.
I think there's two classes of products. When the Chinese distortions have affected the global economy, I think that there's going to be a case for tariffs on a broad range of goods from different countries. But I think on the bilateral side, the underpricing is so severe from China that we're going to see much more significant tariffs on imports directly from China.
Any chance you're going to be serving again in the Trump administration? Just quickly.
I have not been officially asked, but I'm always happy to do whatever I can to advance the interests of the United States.
So if asked, you'd say yes.
We will see.
Okay, we'll come back to you, and we hope you'll come back to us. Really appreciate it. Nazak Nikakhtar, she is partner and chair of the National Security Law practice at the law firm Wiley Rein, former assistant secretary and undersecretary at the Department of Commerce.
Yeah, she did that under President Trump from 2018 to 2021.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Another day, another new record for Bitcoin. I said 92,000 in the teas, 93,000 is what it climbed above for the first time ever.
It just goes higher and higher and higher.
Traders are still assessing the remaining market impact of President-elect Donald Trump's rhetorical support for crypto. We'll see if that strategic Bitcoin reserve ever materializes in 2025 and beyond. So just how high can Bitcoin go? Michael Novogratz, the billionaire head of the crypto investment firm Galaxy Digital, weighed in earlier on Bloomberg TV.
I don't necessarily think the dollar needs anything to back it up. To need to back up the reserve currency is counterintuitive. And so, again, listen, if we get the Bitcoin reserve, and as a guy that owns a lot of Bitcoin, I will not cry. And if you see me crying, there'll be crocodile tears. I think Bitcoin heads to 500,000.
Okay, 500,000 is what Michael Novogratz says. I talked to Kathy Wood last week, Carol. She maintains $1 million per Bitcoin by the year 2030. They're still going with the bull case, though.
6 years from now.
6 years from now. Wow. Let's see what Adam Sullivan has to say. He's CEO of the AI infrastructure and digital asset mining company Core Scientific. He joins us from Dallas, Texas. Adam, good to have you back with us. Always good to check in with you. Just remind everybody where Core Scientific sits right now when it comes to the crypto space, when it comes to the mining space, because you're also going big on AI servers.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. Core Scientific, we've been the largest Bitcoin mining company for the past 3 years. So we've been very dedicated to this space. And, as you mentioned, we're also building out one of the largest AI footprints across the United States as well. So we sit kind of in the cornerstone of two of the most talked about industries right now in the world.
Are you still focused as much on Bitcoin as you were since you have pivoted somewhat to AI infrastructure?
Yeah, we're pivoting some of our sites, but we're still maintaining a significant presence in the Bitcoin mining industry. We're still one of the largest miners in the industry today. And so, we believe in the future of Bitcoin, and that's where we're going to continue to invest capital in going forward. Given
where Bitcoin is today, 93,000 is what it hit today. Was it a mistake to pivot any of your facilities?
Absolutely not. When you think about AI and the contracts that we're signing 12-year deals with 2 5-year extensions. That's locked in revenue that is above even some of the best mining economics we've had over the past 5 years. So we feel very confident that this is going to provide us an advantage where we're going to be able to make counter-cyclical investments in the mining industry, given we have these long-term stable contracts and lower our cost of capital.
Hey, Adam, so what's going to be the split realistically longer term? How do you see your business evolving between mining and hosting? Let's talk top line revenue.
Yeah. Top line revenue, AI is going to continue to push as a higher percentage over the next few years because Bitcoin mining is going through kind of another renaissance period of where those facilities are going. Bitcoin mining is moving to smaller sites. You're finding economies of scale in the number of sites you operate, not just the large, having a larger site. So that's really what we're seeing, and that's what we're pushing towards. And so that's going to cause an economic split here, where our AI sites are built for hyperscalers. They're massive sites, very large revenue numbers. We've already contracted for $8.7 billion this year. Those are numbers that trump what you can achieve in the Bitcoin mining industry without gobbling up too much of the network.
Let me ask you something. Are you hedging your bets if this Bitcoin thing doesn't quite ultimately longer term play out as maybe everybody expects, and you think the AI is a surer bet?
I would say quite the opposite. Really, what we're really good at is building large-scale digital infrastructure. Our team is unique in the Bitcoin mining industry. We are a data center first team that came in to build Bitcoin mining. We became the largest Bitcoin miner very quickly. And now we're just utilizing that team, our power infrastructure, for its highest value use cases. And so we're not hedging any bets. In fact, we are still dedicated to both Bitcoin mining and artificial intelligence and high performance computing moving forward.
But it was a company that did have to declare bankruptcy back in December of 2022. So almost 2 years ago. That was when the crypto market crashed. Energy prices were really elevated. You saw a liquidity crunch. Liabilities and assets on the balance sheet were more or less the same. Look, I know you have been moving in a different direction now that the company is relisted and it's back. But what can be learned from that?
Yeah, there's a number of things. One, don't take on short-dated debt if you are in a volatile industry. Bitcoin mining is volatile. And if you go through an extended period of time with a downturn, that's what can cause issues for a company with a lot of short-dated debt on the balance sheet. The one thing you have to remember about Core Scientific, though, is we had the most successful emergence from an equity perspective out of any Chapter 11 case. And in the first 12 months post-emergence, we're one of the most successful emergences from Chapter 11 in history. So we've definitely done right by our equity holders over the past 2 years, even though we did have to go through that Chapter 11 process. And so it was a capital structure issue that's fully been fixed. And now looking forward, we have great growth prospects ahead of us.
How much does a new Trump administration impact your growth prospects on the crypto side?
Yeah, I mean, think about his, 3 of his top priorities that are really speaking to us at Core Scientific, which is he's Bitcoin forward. He wants to push additional energy dominance in the United States, and he wants to have all of the artificial intelligence that U.S. companies are using actually done in the United States. So these are all things, all 3 of those priorities, are really hallmarks for us in terms of what speaks to us for the future of our company. And that's just going to mean that we're going to have better growth prospects. U.S. companies are going to be looking to build more infrastructure in the United States. And it's going to allow more energy to come onto the U.S. grid, which is critical for everyone in the United States, regardless of whether you're a high energy consumer or not.
It's something we, I think heard in the soundbite that we just played with Michael Novogratz, but or just expectations. But this idea, part of Donald Trump, he has talked about creating this national Bitcoin reserve. I don't know, how are you thinking about that? How is that possible? How likely is that?
I would put the percentages rather low at something like that occurring, but like Novogratz, I would fully support it. As a Bitcoiner myself, I would be pretty excited about something like that. But it's really hard to know. When you look at the U.S. government buying Bitcoin, that is a pretty major step for the U.S. government to undertake. We're seeing it from some other governments, but they are not the U.S. government. They're not the world power of the United States.
Okay, so it raises the fundamental question that I have. What would be the point of the U.S. government buying Bitcoin? What would be the point of a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the U.S.?
And is that my tax dollars going towards that? But that's an aside. Go ahead. Answer Tim's question.
Yeah, I think, when you look at other countries right now, there are a lot of other countries that are putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And there's a lot of...
They're not the largest economies in the world.
But you think about China, you think about Russia. I mean, they are much more Bitcoin forward than most people understand. I mean,
Wait,
I would estimate...
Why would you say that about China? China has some really strict regulations when it comes to cryptocurrency mining.
I would say probably 20% of the entire Bitcoin network still operates out of China.
Wow.
From a mining perspective. And so that is a lot of local municipalities in China still allowing Bitcoin mining to occur. And if you think about the amount of energy generation that they've developed over the past few years, especially think about renewables, that most of that power is going to get dumped into the ground for an extended period of time. It could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. And so they're looking at ways to monetize that, and they are 100% monetizing that, at least in part, through Bitcoin mining.
But still, what's the point here in the U.S. of buying Bitcoin for the U.S. government to do it, to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve?
Yeah, how is that important to maybe our national security, or I don't know?
I think it's a hedge against their own Federal Reserve, right? And so when you think about the U.S. government putting Bitcoin on balance sheet, it's putting a stake in the ground that they believe in the future of Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin has a future on a global stage amongst governments, which I think is probably one of the first times this has ever been talked about in history for Bitcoin.
I wonder, though, if that bites the U.S., Carol, because you're essentially saying, okay, our treasuries are backed with the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, but if the U.S. then starts to buy Bitcoin,
then what's
then
the faith
as
behind as a hedge
against its own currency? Then does that affect the full faith and credit of the U.S.?
Right. Does that make that not as important? Which would go for an argument against doing this. I don't know. I mean, we're living in interesting times. Hey, I am curious, Adam, about your outreach, you and your team at Core Scientific, when it comes to either lobbying Donald Trump or whether it's reaching out to Howard Lutnick. Just give me an idea of efforts that you guys are doing on your behalf.
Yeah, prior to the election, we were speaking to both sides of the aisle. As we look towards the new administration, we are in constant dialogue across not only the federal level, but also the local, state level, and community level, as well, as we've seen a number of changes across some of the jurisdictions that we operate in. So, it requires constant communication because we don't know all the rules or potential regulations that are coming down the pipeline. We don't know what's going to be relaxed. And so that requires a lot of dialogue and hopefully, them taking some of our input about what will drive more job growth, what will drive more adoption of data centers, Bitcoin mining facilities across the United States.
Hey, one other thing that I think about, like as your universe kind of evolves and with the hosting, energy policy, you've got to be watching it, right? In terms of, we know AI and servers are hosting AI. It just eats more and more power. What are your expectations around that? What kind of assistance or policy changes are you hoping on that front?
Yeah, I would say it's more firm generation power being brought into the grid. And so that is across nuclear, that's across natural gas, that's across all of the firm generation power that actually creates a more stable grid. Those are critical to not reducing brownouts, reducing blackouts.
Can you explain that? We only have about a minute left, but I think I don't get that. I'll be honest. How does that make a more stable grid?
So renewable power. So let's take wind, for example. At the highest rate, it can run at about 45% capacity factor, meaning 45% of the day it operates. Solar is about 35%. And so as we've taken off firm generation power off the grid and replaced it with renewables, that's the reason why you're seeing a lot more brownouts across the United States in areas that have high proliferation of renewable energy. So bringing more firm generation power onto the grid reduces that volatility of when capacity is actually available, because supply is pretty constant. It changes throughout the day. It's high in the morning, it's high in the afternoon, but that's not necessarily when the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. And so that's what creates the instability across the US grid.
Really fascinating stuff. Always good to check in with you, Adam. When we spoke a few months ago, I had no idea Bitcoin was going to be going to 93,000.
I don't think most people did.
We'll see what it is when we check in with you.
It can move around
in a few months.
bit.
Your prediction, higher or lower if we speak to you in 3 months?
I feel like we're going to be a bit higher than today.
A bit higher than today. All right.
Adam, thank you so much. Be well. Adam Sullivan, he's CEO of the AI infrastructure and digital asset mining company Core Scientific, joining us on this Wednesday from Dallas.